A review of Total War Pharaoh. Total War Pharaoh is the first Total War game set in the ancient Near East, and that is something I have personally been waiting for quite a long time. As the Gudea Total War channel, I was not about to let this game go by without giving it its full due. Now, I'm going to say something a little controversial here. The idea and mechanics of the game are pretty solid all around, but the scale and scope of the campaign is too limited. The campaign is not set in the time period it should have been. The battles suffer from the same issues all Warscape games suffer from. And all of this combined leads to a game that can be quite enjoyable, but will need significant expansion and modding to feel anywhere near complete and balanced. This is a problem that has plagued too many Total War titles over the years. Now let's get into the campaign. The campaign map, at least what is there, is fantastic. It looks great, it's pretty balanced in terms of the number of settlements, but is far too small in terms of its scope. The Mycenaeans, the Artsawans, the Mesopotamians, the Elamites, all of these cultures and kingdoms were critical parts of the Bronze Age, and their lack of inclusion is inexcusable. It hurts the ability of the game to properly portray the destruction of the Bronze Age collapse, and more importantly, it hurts replayability and thus the longevity of the game. Let me clearly outline the factions necessary to make the game feel somewhat complete. Cyprus, or Alashia in Hittite, Artsawa in Western Asia Minor, Mycenae in Greece, Assyria, Kassite Babylon, and Elam. And that's the bare minimum. The campaign gameplay itself is pretty similar to recent Total Wars, mostly Troy. The mechanics that are supposed to be unique to Pharaoh are essentially renamed versions or tweaked versions of mechanics already in Troy, and while I feel a lot of them make a lot of sense, and even a bit more sense here in Pharaoh, there are a few things I can't quite get behind. The UI design in Troy and here in Pharaoh is just very difficult for me to wrap my head around. While people denigrate the Rome Remastered UI, and rightfully so in some cases, I just find the UI of the recent Total Wars, especially Three Kingdoms and now Troy and Pharaoh, to be far more difficult to grasp, with certain buttons and tabs in locations that are simply not as intuitive as I think they could be. The Bronze Age collapse era is when the first naval battles in history are recorded, and their absence here is very glaring, unfortunate, and again, really inexcusable. The resource system from Troy returns here, and while I think this mechanic could have been used in an excellent way to portray the difficulty of resource management and drought that truly caused the collapse of many kingdoms and city-states near the end of the Bronze Age, it definitely is not used to its full potential in the vanilla game. The tech tree, or I suppose it's more of a web, is actually done better here than in Troy in terms of how the progression makes sense, but the fact that Pharaoh's campaign takes place in the span of a few decades means it is far more gamey than realistic, at least in terms of its feel, and it makes it somewhat immersion-breaking for me. I like tech trees in Total War. I mean, I'm a civilization guy, so I really like the idea. But honestly, I feel like they were done best in Shogun 2 and Rome 2, where the campaigns take place over a long period of time, and the advancements feel less gamey and more realistic. A major issue here is that the environmental and management issues that plagued the Bronze Age empires near the end of the era are not really to be found here in the campaign mechanics, and this is very, very disappointing, and rather immersion-breaking again. It is too easy to get your kingdom rolling as you start to expand and build up your economy. This is the issue with the resource system. I like the resource system here, but then eventually you don't have to make any tough choices about resources. You get more land, you build more buildings, you get more resources, and there's no real punishment here. Again, this is somewhat similar to Rome 2's economic mechanics that don't really have an effect on like public order, and the mechanics are fine on their own, but they don't interact with each other. That's a big problem here in Pharaoh too. And you don't have to make tough choices that could possibly lead to de-urbanization, depopulation, rebellion, nomadic or sea people incursions, settlement abandonment, or starvation. You just make choices and deal with external political threats, which definitely doesn't feel like mechanics for a campaign set in the Bronze Age collapse. These feel like mechanics designed for a full campaign set at the height of the Bronze Age, where you're building up your kingdom. And that's when this game should have been set, the height of the Bronze Age. It would have made a lot more sense there. In the end, the campaign gameplay, in terms of its mechanics, suffers from the exact same problems Rome 2 suffers from, and this is just not acceptable 10 years later. A compounding issue is the focus of the campaign. We need Western Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, parts of Iran, and Greece in the campaign, along with major playable factions from each of these regions with different advantages and playstyles. The battles in Total War Pharaoh honestly feel pretty good to me. No Total War battle engine in recent memory has come close to the feel of battles in Rome 1 and Medieval 1. Yes, I said Medieval 1, not 2. And that is really sad to say in 2023. Now, I am not a Total War engine purist or anything, and for me, campaign immersion and mechanics have always come first. And in that regard, I don't see much to complain about with Total War Pharaoh's battles. The battles, considering this is a vanilla, unmodded Total War game I'm reviewing, are paced quite nicely, I think, quite a bit slower than the average vanilla Total War battle. For me, vanilla Total War battles have generally been on the fast side in terms of battle balance, which negatively affects the player's ability to actually react and use tactics effectively. Now, there are arguments that the faster battles make your initial unit formations and approaches more impactful, and that it makes it more difficult to simply correct major tactical errors in the middle of a battle. But as a longtime player of mods like Europa Barbarorum, I can say that I enjoy some slower-paced battles that give the player more opportunities to try out different tactics. Again, the battle engine is nowhere near as good as Rome 1's, which was when the battle engine peaked in terms of the physics, impact of charges, cavalry, unit collision. But I don't see much of a difference here compared to the other recent games. So I'm not going to criticize it too much, other than, in general, the engine needs an overhaul. It needs to be changed and updated. It's not acceptable that we're seeing the same issues we saw in Rome 2 here. That's all I'm going to say about that. So, conclusion. Should you buy Total War Pharaoh for the full price right now? I have to be frank. The only Total War games I've purchased for full price were Medieval 2, Shogun 2, and Rome 2. The only one that was worth that price upon release, arguably, was the greatest vanilla Total War game of all time, being Shogun 2. The others only became worth that full price with the introduction of major modifications from the community or after months of patches and DLC or free LC or expansions. So no, you should not run out and buy Total War Pharaoh right now. Would I buy it at a steep discount? Yes, absolutely. This is a historical Total War game after all, and I support anybody truly striving to create an immersive and realistic video game based on the ancient Near East especially. I don't doubt that modders will make the campaign feel more like the Bronze Age collapse than it does in the vanilla game. There are reasons to doubt that the developers will actually expand the game to include the geographic regions that absolutely need to be included to make the game feel complete. And that is the sad reality here, which is why I recommend getting the game only at a steep discount. I don't dislike the game at all. The premise is fantastic. The new setting was desperately needed for Total War. But we need to start seeing some changes in the historical Total War formula. We need an updated engine. We need a campaign that covers a long period of time with a diverse assortment of factions. And we did not get anything of the sort here. And this is not the fault of the Bronze Age setting, or the ancient Near Eastern setting. The fault is purely on the scope and scale of the game. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you enjoy content about the historical Total Wars and their mods. I'll see you in the next one later.